Hi everyone, it's Matt here from Launch Helmet Cams. Today we're going to do a review of the new Sony action cam, the HDR-AS15. We're not going to bother going over sort of the basic features and how the camera works. You can get that covered off on plenty of other reviews. What we're going to do is look at some of the less obvious factors that really affect the usability of cameras like these. So on paper, the Sony action cam looks like a really good camera. You get a waterproof housing is included, wide angle lens, you get features like steady shot, 120 frames per second at 720p, Wi-Fi if you go for the Wi-Fi option, HDMI output, you know, all sorts of great features that on paper sound really good. But really, how does this translate to the real world? We've been playing with this camera for the past few weeks, and although it does have some very good features, we feel that it really is quite fundamentally flawed in some of the less obvious aspects of the camera. So we'll go over those, and you can see what we think of it. So starting off, here's a good example. When you go to record with the Sony action cam, you press the button on the back, it'll power up and start recording. Now you may or may not have heard that sound. It does make a sound, but it's very, very faint. When you're out and about and you're actually using this camera, you don't hear that. And that's a real problem. All the other major manufacturers, your GoPros, Contours, Drifts, have worked this out and have really loud audible indication, which is really helpful. For example, say on the Contour, slide this switch forward, get a nice loud beep, lets you know that you're recording, and also you've got a light on the front, lights on the top. Slide it back and you get nice two loud beeps. You're going to hear that when you're outside. Sony, you've got a tiny little red light back in here that you may or may not be able to see, and virtually no audible indication that you're recording. So you're going to end up every single time you go to start recording, because it's the same button for start and stop, you're not 100% sure whether that you've pressed it to start, have you pressed it to stop, did the signal sort of get through. So you'll find that you'll always be checking it, and which is a pain if you're wearing it on a helmet or something, having to take it off every time to check if it's recording or not. The next thing that you'll find when you're out and about and actually using this camera is if you want to actually change any of the modes in the camera, there's no actual buttons on the outside of the housing to change the settings. So if you do want to change the settings within the camera, you actually have to open up the housing like so, pull the camera out, do your changes, put it back in, and get going again. This might not seem like much, but you know, if you're out and it's a less than perfect day, if it's raining, you don't really want to be doing that. In the winter, when it's cold, you don't want to be doing that. You know, if you're out doing something where you're wearing gloves, you've got to pull your gloves off, do all the other stuff. It's quite messy, and again, all your other major manufacturers, your GoPros, Contours, Drifts, have that sorted out. For example, you know, you've got the Drift camera here, which has all the buttons on the outside. You can go through and change everything. That's great. Another thing is the housing is a curved lens on it, which is good for shedding water when it's on land, but underwater you're going to find that that's going to distort your image. I believe that maybe Sony are going to come out with a flat lens cover for this, but at the moment there's no such thing available. So for diving, even though it's a waterproof housing, it's not really any good for going underwater because that's going to distort your image. So that's the housing, that it's got some real issues. The next problem is the mounts. First obvious thing, this is the basic helmet mount that comes with the Sony. It's got a backing that you peel off, stick it on, and then the camera slots into it, which is fine. You know, that's basically how all the manufacturers work these days. The problem is they've gone for a no-name basic adhesive, and while it's going to work for it to start with, you're going to have problems with that down the track, especially in cold weather, or especially when it's exposed to the wet. All the other major manufacturers, again GoPro, Contour, Drift, all use 3M VHB adhesive on their mounts, and there's good reason for that. This stuff is what you need. It sticks extremely well and it's super reliable. Prior to all these companies using those, they did have a lot of customers that were losing their cameras, and I think we're going to find the same thing with the Sony. So I really don't have much faith in this adhesive. The next problem that you've got is that, and this is, you know, it's not a major problem, but it's not brilliant, is it's quite large. You know, you compare that to, say, the size of a GoPro mount, and it is quite large. Same with, say, the Drift one, and even the Contour mount. So the problem is a lot of the time you go to mount somewhere, you don't have a lot of real estate. You need a lot of room to find somewhere to mount this, which moves on to the next problem, and this is one of the really big issues with this mounting system and the camera, is that there's no adjustability in it. So for example, if I wanted to try and mount this camera on my motocross helmet, for one, there's no rotation in the lens. A couple of manufacturers like Drift and Contour, their front lens rotates, so you can mount this camera in any sort of orientation, and then you rotate the front lens around until it's pointing up. Works great. So you can mount it anywhere on any sort of surface, and then it's also got rotation in this axis as well. Exact same with the Contour. You've got rotation in the front lens, and then at least one of their mounts, helmet mounts, has rotation this way as well. That works really well. GoPro don't have the rotating lens, but what they do have is their foot here. You have adjustment aft and back, aft and forward, and then you do also have the option of a right angle adapter. They call it a three-way pivot mount, and that's got a lot of adjustability front and back as well. So for example, I've got my GoPro mounted here on the side. I use that, and I can put it on here. I can go back, forward, this way, that way, so you can line up your angle. Sony has absolutely zero adjustment, so there's no adjustment this way, so you have to have the camera pointed up square. It has to be mounted this way, and it can't be side mounted. There's no option of side mounting and bracketing it so that you can put it on the side. And then there's no adjustment this way either. So on this helmet, the only place that you can put this mount is here, and because of the way the visor is, that's the absolute most forward position that I can get it in. So the only way that I can mount this camera to this helmet, if I put this on, is by doing that. And even when you're going fast, you know, that's going to be sort of your forward position. The camera's too high, so I basically can't use this camera with this helmet. And this isn't a particularly odd helmet, this is just a basic motocross helmet. So yeah, I'd be pretty disappointed if I bought this and couldn't mount it on my helmet. The other issue with the Sony Action Cam is just the general lack of mounts. You know, you get one of these curved mounts and a flat one. There's a suction cup coming out, and there's a headband mount that's supposedly coming out, but with the weight of this camera experience, I can tell you right now the headband mount's not going to really work. We've only ever seen one that worked particularly well, and that was for a much lighter camera, and so yeah, you're going to find it's going to flop around. So you really don't have any option in mounting. For example, if I wanted to mount this camera to my mountain bike helmet, there's no way to do it. This one has a nice big vent all the way through here, so there's just nowhere to stick the adhesive. And for example, I've got a GoPro mount on here, so I can mount the GoPro, and again, Contour have got a mount like this, a vented helmet mount. Drift have got their goggle strap mount, which you can easily use in this configuration with the Velcro strap for the remote control. So yeah, you'll find all sorts of examples like that where there's just not really any mounting options. Going on from there, another issue that we have found with this camera is the audio. It's similar in a way to the GoPro in that it sits in the waterproof housing, and with the GoPro you do get a bit of a rattling noise over sort of rough ground and that sort of thing, and that's amplified with the Sony action cam. It just sort of sounds like you can hear the camera rattling in the housing. I'm not sure if that's it, or if it's the camera rattling in the mount, or what the deal is, but the audio over any sort of rough ground is pretty horrendous. It's fine in situations where the camera is really stable, and so say if you had it mounted inside a vehicle or on top of a vehicle, but yeah, for other applications the audio is not bad. Now you would think that, okay, well the action cam comes with a microphone input, so what I can do is I can just plug in an external mic and use that for the audio, which is what you can do with GoPro, Contour, Drift, and that's a really good option. The problem with this one, and this is my favourite, is you can't use it. They've put a microphone input on the camera, but there's no way to actually access it. So if we open this up and have a look at it, the microphone input's at the bottom of the camera, right there. So when you go to plug it in, there's no access to it. And what's more, you know, with the old days with GoPro, before they had their skeleton housing, you could drill out a housing and do it that way, and that worked quite well. They now have a skeleton housing where you don't need to do that. The problem with this one is the microphone sits right underneath where this latch is, the microphone input, sorry. So you cannot use the microphone input and use the housing at the same time. So the only way to use it is with the camera outside of the housing, and that's, I wouldn't want to do that. For one, there's no way to mount it. There's absolutely no mounting points on this. There's no way to mount this camera once you've got it outside the housing. And the other thing is your lens is completely exposed. So if you tried doing that, there's a good chance you're going to scratch the lens and your camera's done. Those are probably all the major features that I think we've got issue with. There's some other bits and pieces that aren't brilliant, but you know, you can't expect it to be perfect out of the box. On the technical side, you know, there's things like you don't have any sound when you're recording in the 120 frames per second mode. Another thing is the field of view is significantly reduced when you use this camera in with the steady shot. So normally it's 170 degree wide angle, and the reason why all these cameras have a wide angle is it makes the image look a lot more stable. However, with this camera, when you put it on steady shot, it really narrows down the field of view down to about 120 degrees, which is a bit of a trade-off. So we've sort of found that when you use the steady shot, it does improve the stability of the shot, but it does make the image quite blurry because it's working quite hard in situations where there's a fair bit of movement, and it's sort of having to work harder because the field of view is reduced. So overall, technically on paper this is a great camera. In practice, not so much. It sort of feels like, you know, Sony have gone to a design engineer that sits in an office and they've said, you know, we want this camera to have this, and this features, and they've gone out and built that, which is great, but it's like they never really bothered to take it outside and actually test it. It on paper has is a really good camera, and technically it is a good camera. You know, Sony are great at making cameras, and they've sort of shown that in this. You know, it's got good glass, its video quality is great, it's got some cool features, but unfortunately, yeah, it's just really lacking in the practicalities. So yeah, that's the Sony Action Cam. Depends on your application. You know, maybe you'll have an application, say I mentioned driving. If you're using this for motorsports, if you're mounting this with a suction cup mount, which is going to give you a bit more articulation, you're not going to have so much the sound issues. A basic suction cup mount, you know, maybe that'll be fine for you. But if you're planning on taking this thing outdoors, or doing anything, you know, any sort of different sports and stuff, I'd seriously consider looking elsewhere. Yeah, that's the Sony Action Cam. Stick around, we're going to have a full comparison of this versus GoPro Contour and Drift in the next week or two. So yeah, check it out.